What would it be like to come face to face with a wild bull or hear the rustle of a lynx? What would Scotland look like, feel like, smell like if it was left to rewild? Hi, I'm Sarah LaBrecque, and this is the Purpose Pioneers from Positive News. In this podcast, I'm meeting the leaders of some of the UK's most inspiring organisations to uncover how they're turning their ideals into action. In each episode, we'll explore 3 defining moments that reveal their journey of putting purpose into practice. The Purpose Pioneers is supported by Triodos Bank. So today, I have Steve Micklewright joining me. Welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Hi, Sarah.
So Steve is the CEO of Trees for Life, a charity that is rewilding the Scottish Highlands at scale. So Steve, can you give our listeners a little bit of background about what Trees for Life does and where it does it?
Sure. So Trees for Life is based in the Scottish Highlands, and we work a lot in the area of the Scottish Highlands above Loch Ness. So if you imagine Scotland and imagine Loch Ness going through the sort of middle of the north, we're working very heavily above that area. And the main thing that we try to do is restore the Caledonian Forest, which is the native forest that should cover most of the mountains of Scotland. And we're also trying to restore the integrity of that forest, if you like, trying really hard to make sure that that forest can function. And that often means bringing back some of the species that we've lost as well. So we're restoring the forest, bringing back the trees, bringing back the native woodland cover, and putting the ecosystem back together following hundreds of years of problems caused by people.
The Caledonian Forest, can you give a little bit more of an explanation about what that was? What that was many, many years ago and what it is today?
Sure. So if you imagine that 10,000 years ago, most of Scotland and particularly the Highlands was covered in glaciers and ice. It was a barren, empty landscape with very, very little life in it. Gradually, as the ice retreated, plants and animals started to recolonize the landscape. And some of the pioneers are the Scots pine tree, which is our national tree in Scotland, this beautiful conifer that is actually found across Europe and Asia, but is very particular to Scotland. That particular tree and all the life that comes with that tree gradually moved north into the Scottish Highlands. And as the ice retreated, we got more Caledonian forest. And then as the climate changed, the forest started to retreat. And then as humans came on the scene and started to chop down trees in order to have timber for housing or for ships or for fuel, the forest went into a very significant decline. So there's only about 1 to 2% of the original Caledonian forest left now in Scotland. So it's in a pretty perilous state in many ways. And
you're working really hard to kind of restore and grow those areas.
Yeah, so we've been working on our estate. There's a place called Dundragon, which is 10,000 acres of pine wood and woodland that we're trying to help recover. And then we work a lot with lots of other organisations, lots of other landowners, so that together we can restore this forest at scale. Because 1% of a vast forest requires a lot of people working together to make that happen. So we're just about to start a sort of partnership of everybody working together on Caledonian pine woods. About 30 organisations are coming together on that one because we know we can't do it on our own.
And so you've been with Trees for Life as their CEO for quite a while. I think it's coming up to 10 years now, is it?
Yeah, 10 years I've been there. So it's been about, I first started in 2016. Mm-hmm. So it's been quite a long time for me to stay somewhere, but it's been absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
And so what about your earlier career? Have you always worked in conservation?
Yeah, I mean, I started out, I suppose when I was about 9 or 10 years old, if I'm honest. Somebody came to our school assembly and explained that the local river near my school was going to be widened to 100 feet wide in order to stop people's suffering from flooding. And I just thought this was mad. And the guy that came to our school assembly wanted somebody to go out into the area that was going to be affected and record all the trees. And I was only I must have been about 10, 11. I was really young anyway. So I went out with these group of mostly retired people, and I just happened to be really good at identifying trees. So we identified all these trees on something called the River Brent in London. And as a result of that and all the campaigning the grown-ups did, that river never got widened and it's still very beautiful. So that was my first thing about it. And then I'm just one of these people that just likes being out in nature. And so when I started to study a degree, I did biology and then I studied ecology, and that led me into working in nature. So I started off as a field ecologist, particularly in woodlands, surveying woodlands, figuring out what needed to be done to help them. And then I ended up somehow becoming a CEO of a charity. We never planned it that way. I planned to be outside all the time. Yeah.
Wow. So even at the tender age of 9, 10 years old, preserving nature was protecting it and having a very keen interest in being outside was just, that was within you.
I think so. I think so. I mean, the other thing about my childhood is it was quite a difficult childhood, and so what I used to do to get away from what was going on in the family, to be honest, I'd go out on my bike and cycle along the canal near where I lived. I'd go and see my granddad, who was often fishing. So nature's always been my way of dealing with things. So if I have a stressful morning at work, for example, I'll still go out in the forest near my home and walk around with the dogs and look at the birds and everything, because that helps me to kind of feel good. And that's always been a thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of helpful in terms of your well-being and your mental health.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
I'm sure that's true for a lot of people as well.
I think so, and I think when we had the COVID pandemic in particular, that became really important for a lot of people, and for those people that kind of got that sort of sense of, okay, being outside is good for me. I hope that continues now that the pandemic is over, because for me, certainly, it keeps me kind of centered, if you like.
Absolutely. When you started with Trees for Life, you had come from BirdLife Malta.
Yes, yeah. So I'd spent 3 years working as the executive director of BirdLife Malta. Malta's a small island in the Mediterranean Sea, but it happens to be on the flyway for migrating birds. So there is a long history in Malta of people hunting, shooting birds out of the sky, mostly against the EU rules that govern conservation now. So my job in Malta was very much to try to bring this problem to the attention of the world, but also try to see if we could solve the problem. And we ended up having a referendum in Malta to try to ban spring hunting, because spring hunting is a really damaging thing, because the birds are flying over Malta to get to the north of Europe to breed. So you're killing birds that are about to breed. So that's really bad for conservation. And unfortunately, we lost that referendum by 4,000 votes, just like Brexit, a very small loss, which was devastating for us. And people in Malta can continue to try to stop spring hunting because it is so damaging. But there is a lot of politics in Malta that means that hunters can claim political advantage by saying, if you support hunting, you get our vote. So it's all very highly politicized, and quite depressing, I'm afraid. So the things don't seem to have moved on very much in 10 years, I'm afraid.
Right. And so when you made the transition to Trees for Life, what kind of was the motivation, I suppose, to make that leap?
Mainly personal, to be honest. I mean, Malta is the most crowded island in Europe. It is like Hong Kong for Europe. It's the most densely populated place in Europe. So I needed to go somewhere where there weren't so many people. I also needed to do work that was more positive. Fighting something is exhausting, and particularly when you kind of feel every step forward, you then have 2 steps back. And I felt working in Trees for Life and working on rewilding was something really positive, something that you could throw yourself into and see the results and see the impact, and not always be fighting other people, which is what the Malta situation was. So it was important for me to move into something that was wholly positive, which is what I feel rewilding is.
In the Purpose Pioneers, we ask our guests to share 3 key moments, 3 sort of defining moments that are centered around discovering their sense of purpose and putting it into practice. So the first one we're curious about is any sort of tipping point moment that you might have had, Steve. So when it became clear that you needed to go down a certain path, or when you sort of had a realization that, maybe you needed to make a change.
I suppose a tipping point for me was actually when we were traveling back from Malta to Scotland, and we were hiking in the Dolomites in Italy, in the north of Italy, and it's a beautiful, wonderful landscape. We're heading up towards the top of the tree line, and I had my 3 dogs on my lead with me, and my partner was behind me taking photos of the wildflowers and stuff. And we were just heading up towards the edge of the tree line, and about 100 meters, maybe quite a lot less than that. It's hard to kind of get the distance when something like this happens to you. But something that I thought was a German Shepherd dog walked out in front of us, and I thought, oh, what's a German Shepherd doing up here in the middle of nowhere? And my dogs just didn't react. They were just kind of sniffing around, and I was looking at this animal. It didn't have a collar on. Didn't actually look like a German Shepherd when I looked at it properly, and it just kind of looked at me, and I looked at it, and then I thought, oh my God, that's a wolf. And this wolf seemed to stare at us for ages. It probably was only, a few seconds, but it seemed to stare at us for ages, and we kind of looked at each other, and then it then disappeared off into the undergrowth. And then my partner came up and joined us, and I was like, I can't believe what's happened. And we were then spent our time looking into the undergrowth to see if Andrew could see the wolf again, but it just disappeared. And what that told me was that these big carnivores that have all these legends around, like Little Red Riding Hood and Three Little Pigs, all these nursery stories that we have about how dangerous wolves are, this wolf just looked at us, and he was no threat to us. We were no threat to it, and it just disappeared into the landscape. And it told me, if we want to, we can coexist with these animals. These animals are either frightened of us or are ambivalent towards us usually. So most of the time we will get on fine if we want to.
And so where you were in the Dolomites, are wolves known to populate that area? Was that extremely rare to see one?
I think it was really weird. It was extremely odd experience, I have to say. I can sometimes wonder if I was hallucinating. It was such a bizarre experience. But they are in that landscape, and they have recovered across lots of parts of the mountainous areas of Italy now. So wolves are spreading of their own accord across Europe, which is amazing since they have been so persecuted. And I guess I was just lucky to come across a lone wolf that was walking across the landscape. I have to say, when we headed further up, we found somebody's discarded sandwiches, and I think he was probably scavenging the sandwiches, and then just kind of noticed us and thought, oh yeah, here's a human. I wonder what they're going to leave behind for me to eat.
Yeah.
So it all felt very kind of surreal, but it really did say to me, we can live with this wildlife if we want to.
Right. Humans coexisting with animals and with nature in a peaceful way is something that Trees for Life, that's sort of at the heart of the things that you do. Do you think there's a bit of a misconception, though, that maybe some people think that rewilding means to deprioritize humans and their needs?
Yeah, particularly in Scotland, actually. So there's a long history of the Scottish Highlands being depopulated. And the most dramatic example was in the sort of early 1800s, and around that time, when the people that were living off the land on the big estates of Scotland were literally cleared off the land to make space for sheep grazing. That was the business thing that people go into. So the diaspora, the people that used to live in Scotland that now live in Canada and other parts of North America and around the world, are often the result of that, what we call the Highland clearances. So there is a really strong sense among rural communities that change can mean even less people. So the idea of rewilding, which is very much about allowing nature to be more in control of what happens, to many people equals less people living off the land, less people in the landscape. But the reality is, because our landscape is so damaged, it's so barren, and because we don't have wolves here to do the work that wolves do in controlling deer, we need humans to take the place of the wolf, if you like. So we need deer stalkers to help us reduce deer numbers so this forest can recover on its own. So people often think rewilding equals less jobs, less livelihoods, but all the work that we've done shows that it needs more. A good example of that is Dundragon, which is the estate Trees for Life owns. When we bought it in 2008, it was a deer stalking estate, and it had one person working on it, a deer stalker. Today, there's a land management team of, I guess, about 12 people. And we also have a rewilding centre, a kind of ecotourism business there, which means we employ roughly 30 people now at Dundragon. So that really does show that rewilding, when it's done with people in mind and done with communities in mind, can result in many more people deriving a livelihood from the Scottish landscape, not less. And I think our work at Dundragon is kind of demonstrating that.
Yeah, I heard the term repeopling, that actually rewilding in part means repeopling. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, so we say rewilding is kind of nature-led and human kind of managed. So in order to do that, you need more people, not less. As I say, we need more deer stalkers in the landscape, not less, because we don't have the predators.
Mm-hmm.
We need more people in the landscape deriving a sustainable living, using the wood that we grow in a sustainable way, more kind of high-end use of wood rather than just getting pulped into kind of chipboard and stuff like that. We can use it really, really well. So there are all sorts of kind of almost business opportunities, including tourism, of course, which brings more jobs to where I live. And if you bring more jobs, you have more people living in the landscape, and with more people living in the landscape, you then keep the post office open, you keep the local shop open, you keep the local school open, because people are living in the land rather than living more remotely and away from it. So for me, rewilding and repeopling very much go together.
The Purpose Pioneers is supported by Triodos Bank, which, if you didn't know, has been around for more than 40 years. I've actually been a customer of theirs for a while now. I wanted to put my money somewhere that I could trust was ethical, a bank that not only refuses to fund harmful practices, but actively invests in positive things like nature regeneration, renewable energy, community projects, and social housing. It feels really good to know that my money is funding something that I care about. Visit triodos.co.uk to find out more about the power of moving your money. Back to wolves. Were they a part of the Scottish landscape a long, long time ago? And could they come back? Could we see one there one day? Could someone have that experience that you had in the Dolomites?
Yeah, well, wolves became extinct in Scotland, we think, in 1743 on the Findhorn River, which is actually really close to our office. It's just a few miles from where Trees for Life is based, one of our offices. And it'll be sort of 300 years very soon since they were lost. I think the prospects of seeing wolves back in Scotland is very difficult because of the sense of they are a dangerous wild animal for many people, and there are the stories and the legends about how dangerous they are. And of course, they will undoubtedly take sheep, because they will be in the same sort of habitat where sheep are, and they will be quite easy prey for wolves. So for us in Scotland, where we would deliberately have to bring them back because there is sea between us and Europe, otherwise they'd be here already, if I'm honest, we have to make a deliberate decision about that. And I think that is a long way off. What I think is more likely is that we would see an animal like lynx, which is a Labrador-sized cat, which is much less likely to take sheep and more likely to help us with deer, because its favourite food is roe deer, and it poses very little, if any, threat to humans and their livelihoods. Really, we're much more likely to see that come back because it's a predator that is mostly benign. Yes, it will cause some problems for people, and we would need to manage that and be very careful about that. But it's unlikely to cause the problems that people associate with wolves, and it doesn't have the history of being a dangerous animal in the same way that wolves do. So I think we might see lynx back in my lifetime, but I doubt that wolves will come back.
And what about tauros? I'm not sure if I'm actually saying that properly.
Yeah, tauros or
wild cattle.
Yeah.
There are some efforts to reintroduce them, isn't there?
Yeah, so all the cattle that you see are basically derived from the wild cattle of Europe and Asia, which was called the auroch. And aurochs went extinct, 1600s, I think, in Poland. But what has happened is some very clever people in the Netherlands have taken some ancient breeds of cattle and backbred them to be as close to the original auroch as we can get. So they're genetically and behaviorally really similar to wild aurochs. These are called tauros. And what they do is they're big animals, bigger than most cattle that you see. They actually they're architects of the landscape. So they would go out into a landscape and they would make bull pits. They would disturb the ground so that trees can grow. They bring back biodiversity because they make the landscape more diverse. So we're really interested in releasing a herd of tauros on our estate at Dundragon, to see what they might do in a Scottish context. So will they wake up the landscape? Will they get us more insects and birds and mammals, which is what seems to happen in other parts of Europe where they've been released. So we'd like to try that because it's about bringing back what we call natural processes. We need to see big animals in the landscape because they kind of shake it up a bit, and we're interested to see what Tauros might do.
So, in this podcast, we're focusing on how to turn ideals into action. So, whether you're an entrepreneur or the leader of a large organization, or someone who's just personally interested in shaping their life around things that they really care about. So, Trees for Life was founded by Alan Watson Featherstone in 1986. So he was a young, idealistic ecologist from what I've read of him. Steve, can you tell us about him and how he set up the organization?
Yeah, so Alan Watson Featherstone's our founder, so he set up the whole thing, and Alan's a really interesting character. So he's actually an engineer by training, hasn't got ecological training, but he was living in a place called Findhorn, which is a kind of new age community on the North Scotland coast. And in order to, a bit like me going out and along the canal, in order for him to feel good about life, he used to go out from Findhorn into Glenafric, which is the most beautiful Scottish glen, full of the Caledonian pine woods. And that was his way of kind of centering himself so that he could work well within the Findhorn community. And in 1986, there was a conference about the ecological crisis that we were aware of even back then. And at that meeting, he stood up and said he was going to set up something to try to save the Caledonian pine woods, the Caledonian Forest. And that's kind of what he did. So he raised money to enable the owners of Glenafric, the forestry commission as it was then, the state-owned forest, to be restored. He raised money to buy Dundregan, our first ever estate. And he kind of set this vision of a restored Caledonian Forest, a rewilded Scottish Highlands, and something very much with people at the center of it. So people very much listening to nature and what nature needs and responding to that needs as much as human need. And that's very Alan, is to think, okay, what is nature trying to do here, and how can we facilitate nature to get to where it wants to be? So he's quite an inspiring guy, and really got the charity moving in its first kind of 20 years of kind of existence.
Is he still involved in the organization?
Yes, he is. So he came and witnessed the first ever beaver release in Glenafric just a little while ago now, and he's not working for the charity anymore. But what I very much do with Alan is I will go for massive long walks with him and just share what's happening and take and get his advice on what to do. I mean, the big advice he always gives me, which is, you need to get outside more, Steve, because he tells me, if you don't get out in nature and remember why you're doing this, it can start to feel just like any other job. As long as I get outside occasionally, then the balance seems okay. And then, to be lucky enough to witness some of the key moments, like this first ever beaver release in Glenafric after 400 years, those sorts of things keep me going, yeah.
We're on to our second defining moment, which where we ask people to sort of think about something unexpected, a joyful moment where you felt like your work was really having a real impact. So this beaver release, I think there's a bit of a funny story behind it.
We started thinking about how we could get beavers back into Glenafric in about 2017. And what we realized at that time, and a couple of years into our kind of thinking about this, was there are beavers that are in a river catchment called the Tay, further south from us, around Perth. And those beavers are causing damage to agricultural land. They burrow into the ground and they cause flooding and they cause problems for farmers. And what was happening right up until the early 2020s was that those beavers that were causing problems were being shot. And about 20% of Scotland's beaver population was being shot each year because of the problems they were causing for farmers. Yet we knew there were over 100,000 hectares of ground in Scotland that was suitable for beavers. There's so many rivers and streams and lochs that they could live in. And it felt really bad that we were shooting beavers when we could move them to other parts of Scotland. And that was a government decision that they were not allowed to be moved to places where they could thrive and do really good work. They had to be shot. So we took the Scottish government, the Nature Scot, which is the agency that looks after nature in Scotland, can you believe, to something called a judicial review. We said this is just not right. The way this is done in terms of giving farmers permissions to shoot beavers, not allowing them to be relocated to new areas was wrong. And we won that judicial review. And as a result of that, the government changed its policy and allowed beavers to be spread around, if you like. And the first release like that was at a place called Argotty, which is not far from Stirling in Scotland. The farmer, a guy called Tom, invited us to the second beaver release and on his ground. He's really proud of that. And so me and my colleague Alan turned up in a Trees for Life branded car to witness this release. And as we got out of the car, Tom's mum shouted, "Here are the beaver heroes, here are the beaver heroes," at the top of her voice. And just next to us was one of the people from Nature Scot who was so against what we were trying to achieve. And it just felt quite embarrassing in a way, but also really funny that somebody who was now getting beavers onto their land kind of was kind of thankful for the work that we'd done to enable that to happen. And that just felt quite a special moment.
What is the business model? How do you make the numbers work?
So we're a charity, so we raise a lot of money from individuals, corporates, grant-giving trusts, and that forms the bulk of our income. We've also established a rewilding centre, which is essentially a tourism business, and over time we hope that will generate significant profit that we can then reinvest into the charity. So we sort of have a mixture of kind of commercial and charitable income, and hopefully that gets us through difficult times, because if you've got a good mixture of income streams, hopefully if one is falling away, others are growing. That's the sort of plan.
And have you had any support, loans or investment or anything like that?
Yeah, so in order to make the rewilding centre happen, which is a big capital project, it involved building a rewilding centre and accommodation on site, lots of infrastructure like footpaths. That required about £7 million to make that happen, and it was also started to become real just as COVID was ending, and we had a massive hike in costs. So what we looked at then was a very blended funding model. So we achieved an awful lot of grant income, which was great. Some wealthy individuals made individual donations towards us, which was also great. And then we went to Triodos Bank to discuss a loan that would help us get the whole kind of, if you like, new business up and running and keep it going until it moved into profit. So with Triodos Bank, we raised £2 million through their crowdfunding platform. So that meant lots and lots of different people and individuals invested in the rewilding centre, which we really liked.
What would you say have been one or two of the most kind of challenging periods?
I think the big challenge for us in Trees for Life and in most rewilding organisations is change. We are pioneering change in a landscape that has been very much the same for a long time now. So we go back to the 1800s when the Highland clearances took place, and then people would buy the estates to have deer stalking or grouse shooting. That culture, although it's only been around for a couple of hundred years, feels very embedded. And people are frightened of the change that we're asking for, which is to have more wildlife, a mixture of deer stalking and grouse shooting and rewilded land. And that feels really challenging for many people. And the difficulty comes when you're putting something forward about change, and you're trying to explain that we can have both. It's not a conflict, but it becomes a conflict. So we've seen conflict around beavers being released in the Cairngorms, and no doubt there will be conflict and concerns around the beavers in Glenafric. In fact, we've had quite a lot of opposition to what we've tried to do there, and that is just a hard grind to try to continue to work with people who don't want to see change, to try to enable that change to happen, and also be there for them if there are problems. I think that's the challenge. Is it doesn't have to be conflict all the time, but at the moment we seem to live in a world where people don't want to talk, they want to argue, or a few people don't want to talk, and they want to argue, and it just makes it very conflicty. And that seems to be a pattern, not just in rewilding, but in most things these days when it's about change.
Yeah.
So the challenge and difficulty is, how do you make change happen, and how do you ensure that those people are really worried about it? If they don't support it, we make sure that they're not harmed by it, which is what they're usually worried about. And hopefully one day they can accept it. That's where the difficulty is for us.
So we've arrived at the third defining moment on your journey with Trees for Life so far. Maybe you'll have many more defining moments, Steve. But so this is to kind of think about something that has given you a glimpse of the future, a person, a place, a thing. So what for you represents a vision of the future that you see your work contributing towards?
So I think on the best glimpse of the future that I've ever seen is this place called Glen Affric, and it's this beautiful glen near a town called, a little sort of villagey town called Cannock. You just go out from Cannock and kind of drive into this wonderful landscape, which is a beautiful glen, wonderful lochs and streams, but it has some of the most amazing old pine trees that have been around for hundreds of years. And you can see, because the state forest organisation, Forest and Land Scotland, and Trees for Life, and many others have worked hard for a very long time, you can see what a restored Caledonian Forest landscape looks like, and it is beautiful and stunning. And there's mountains all around you, and this, for me, is what much of Scotland could look like if only we would allow it to happen. So for me, it's about this restored forest that I can actually witness. And there are other places in Scotland as well where you can see what's happening. So it tells me that the work that we're doing can be successful. And just recently, to get beavers into Glen Affric, which are, these are species that make change in the landscape, make change happen that benefits fish and other wildlife, and of course people can see these amazing animals. That for me shows that there's more to do and there's more to achieve in Glen Affric. And who knows, one day maybe lynx will be there. That would be amazing. So we'll not have just have the forest, but we'll have the whole ecosystem working again.
Can you explain a little bit more about Glen Affric? Because I'm trying to kind of picture it. Is it dense? Is it wet? Is it heavily forested? Tell me more about how it feels and even smells.
So I would describe Glen Affric as a little paradise surrounded by these mountains. So it is very much surrounded by mountains. It has a beautiful system of lochs, which are lakes in Scotland, and burns and streams and all this kind of wet environment. And then kind of in the glen, in the valley, you've got this recovered forest. You've got these ancient pine trees, and you've got their offspring all growing up and sprouting. You've got a mixture of peatlands. You've got a mixture of heather moorland as well. And together, that mosaic means it's absolutely humming with wildlife. There are things like crested tits and red squirrels in this landscape because the landscape is so good. And because it is, you can go 10 to 15 miles into this glen on a walk. The further away you get from people, the wilder and wilder it feels. So it's a glimpse of what wildness is like in Scotland, and it's just a very special place because of that, and because this sense that you're in this mountainous landscape, which a lot of the mountains are quite bare. Some of them would be covered in snow this time of the year, but there's this little island, if you like, of beauty and of restored nature.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this little island is the source of that nature spreading out into the landscape. If we can allow that to happen.
I need to book my ticket and get on a train, get out there.
Come and have a look. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve. This has been a really fascinating conversation. So thank you for joining us on The Purpose Pioneers. And a very special thanks to our sponsor, Triodos Bank. And so we'll see you all next time.